Okay. So Daniel, I have you here today to go through the environments survey that I think you collected data for about, what, a month and a half?
Something about that, yeah, around that.
Okay. And so we're making this video to share with the rest of the team so they can see some of the insights and findings from that work. I'll go ahead and share my screen now, and we'll go through some of the data. So just kind of working our way from left to right. We're going to go through some of the information about the survey responses and respondents. So just over half of the respondents who filled out that survey that was shared, I think, as a banner on the environments page. Is that correct, Daniel?
Yeah, that's correct. It was a banner on the page.
So they accessed the survey, and when they completed these questions, one of the questions was how satisfied or dissatisfied they are with the environments page today. So as you can see in this graph here, about 47%, if we look across, somewhat satisfied and extremely satisfied. So that's just about half, which is very good to see. About 25% or a quarter were kind of on the fence about the environments page, and then about 15% that were some level of dissatisfied. And then, as I made a note about down here, when we looked at this across different types of organizations, so we had kind of split this into smaller organizations and larger organizations, we didn't see any differences across those user groups. Next thing we'll cover, and Daniel, feel free to jump in if you have any questions. One of the other questions in the survey was around what elements and actions that they've used on the page. So for this question, they could answer as many of these different response options as necessary. So it wasn't just something where they could select one and move on. And I've listed the top three here, which were deployment information, 53%, commit information, 49%, and then opening a live environment at 40%. So when we scroll down and kind of look at this graphic, these first three are kind of in a cluster. This next group, redeploying environments, job information, and stopping environments, kind of hovering around high 20% to low 30%. And then we've got another group down here of environment folder and deploying to a different environment, kind of high teens and low 20%.
Yeah, that matches our expectations as to what we think is most used and most accessed on the page. But it is notable to see deployment information and commit information at the very top, because that's the core of what the page is. But at the same time, I don't think we do the best job of properly conveying information around the deployment and around the commits in the environments page. So it's pointing in a good direction for us, I think.
Awesome. Thanks, Daniel. Moving on to the next question. This was something that we had talked about a little bit offline and did a follow-up analysis on. So one of the questions that you had was, looking at those different types of things, elements and actions that they could complete and have done on the environments page. Like, is there a breakdown or a difference between larger and smaller organizations across those different actions and elements. So we ran that analysis. This is showing a good chunk of that here. And basically the orange and blue bars represent, small and large organizations across these different types of actions. So in this case, it's commit information. In this case, it's deploying to a different environment and so on. So the only one that we actually observed a significant statistical difference for was opening a large environment. So small organizations, according to the data, are opening live environments about twice as much as large organizations. And we kind of categorize those groupings here. So smaller organizations were 1 to 199 employees, and then larger organizations were 200 or more employees.
Yeah, it was interesting to see that the statistical difference was only in this instance, in this piece of information. I expected to see more of a difference in behaviors between larger organizations and smaller organizations. Maybe there is, but our sample size wasn't that large, so it wasn't so significant. But in any case, it is interesting to see this difference, because essentially smaller organizations usually have a simpler deployment setup. So it makes more sense that they will more likely open their production environment, their live environments directly from the environments page. Whereas larger organizations that have larger, more complicated cloud setups with AWS, and Google Cloud and all of that, the open live environment button may not actually help their workflow. So we already know that these larger organizations have more complex setups. This is just a small signal in that direction. So it's an interesting tidbit.
Cool. Great clarification and good insight to have that, I think we did kind of expect more differences than what we saw here, but it's kind of interesting to see what we found through that follow-up analysis. We're going to move on to these last two insights. So we had some open-ended questions in the survey. The first one was around, what's the main reason that you're visiting the environments page today? And so we got a number of responses to that. This was an open-ended question, so they could provide, as little or as much information as they wanted to. And then I went through this after the survey data was collected and closed, and started grouping that information together to identify specific themes. So for this question, we identified 11 different themes, and I've included them from the things that we saw the most often, and you can kind of see the number of times it popped up in parentheses, all the way down to something that we saw the least. So I think probably the least surprising thing is environments and deployments came up as much as it did. I think that's a very common thing to talk about in the context of just environments in general. And then outside of that, we found particular types of actions that people were performing. So people are trying to check the status of that environment. So they're actively trying to figure out what's going on with something in the moment. We heard a decent amount of things around testing and reviewing features or environments. We also heard about people who were just browsing the website. They didn't really have a particular action or thing that they came to do, but they just wanted to explore a little bit. We also heard about help documentation. So wanting to learn, how do I do something? So people might be not as familiar about how to complete something in the context of the environment page, or wanting to learn through some of the documentation that either they or others have put into GitLab.com. And then we also heard around context and background information. So wanting to learn outside of just checking the status of something, but wanting to dive a little bit deeper and understand, okay, how long ago was this launched? Who did it? Really try to understand something from kind of quite a while ago, not just something that's currently active. And then outside of that, we heard about URLs, troubleshooting a problem, so trying to understand what the issue was. We heard about versioning, and then a couple of suggestions for the environment page. And Daniel and I pulled some themes and some quotes that we included in this insight. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on in regards to this particular question, Daniel?
Yeah, when you mention version, do you mean specifically users mentioning that they want to know which version is live on the environment, or it's something else?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I believe it was around like wanting to check the version of something. So I've got the Qualtrics data pulled up. So let's see, for version, if we select that, and if I scroll down, we can see like what particular things were grouped into version. So I want to check the version running on a specific environment, deployment status, ideally version for QA.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I would say this team wouldn't be the same, but it's really close to the second one, I think. The third one, checking status. So essentially the status of the environment being if there is a deployment that is currently being deployed into that environment, and when that deployment is finished, there's a certain version that is live on that environment. So these two are very closely related, I would say. And it makes sense that checking status is at the top, because knowing what is live is one of the big reasons people go to the environments page. So it makes sense that it came up so high.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that you brought up, that, you know, these two, number 3 and number 10, are quite related. As I was going through the data, context and background information also kind of falls into that. So I think there's a lot of situations where people are just looking for like very specific information that they're trying to reference, so they can know that everything's good to go.
Cool. Then we have one more, right?
Yep. So this one, kind of like the similar question or the previous question, has a lot of overlaps, as you'll see with the theme. So this was, what information do you look for first when you land on the environments page? So not surprisingly, environments was at the top. Status information, as we had just talked about, also one of the top ones. Learning and help documentation got a lot more comments this time around. So people are trying to look for, like, how do I do something? If I've documented before, I want to see information about like how I did it, so I can kind of refresh my memory. So I'm not sure like how much we really link to like our existing like doc site, but there could be opportunities where, since we know people are trying to find kind of more basic information or how-tos or tutorials, maybe ways that we can try to direct them towards those things.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting to see this result coming so high up. I think there are two big opportunities here for improving help and learning documentation. The first is empty states, right? When the users first get to the environments page and they're first setting up, how we can embed in the UI the links to the documentation, the guidance, and really the hand-holding that they need in order to successfully set up their first environments. And the second case is for these customers or customers that already have their environment set up. There are a number of advanced features that can really take their setup to the next level, right? That sometimes you actually need them, but you don't know they're there because GitLab is a huge platform. So it's definitely something worth diving into.
Awesome. And similar to the previous question that we had gone through, a lot of these other themes are very similar in kind of where they fell and things that, came up. I think the only additional thing is this section for other, which was really just a random assortment of different topics. So nothing really to report there, but just some really great feedback that we got overall in terms of these different themes and just general comments.
All right.
Cool. Well, I think that kind of covers everything. Did you have any final questions or comments before we wrap up?
No, I think that's all. I hadn't seen the quotes on the dovetail insights yet. That's really nice and really paints a really clear picture of what these teams relate to. So thanks for that. This has been really informative.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for pulling those out of the Google Sheet.
Yeah, no problem.
Cool. Well, thanks, Daniel. I'll stop the recording.
All right. Thanks for watching, folks.
Thanks, everybody.